I spent 42 years counting down to retirement. 3 months after it finally came, I caught myself parked across the street from the steel mill where I'd worked my entire adult life. I wasn't there to visit. I wasn't there to pick anything up. I just sat in my truck, watching the morning shift walk through the gate. Lunch boxes, coffee mugs, steel-toed boots. After 10 minutes, I drove home. That's when I realized retirement hadn't given me the life I'd been dreaming about. It had taken away the one I knew how to live. My name's Frank. I'm 67. For 42 years, I worked maintenance at a steel mill outside Pittsburgh. It wasn't glamorous. Most days meant broken conveyors, burned-out motors, leaking hydraulic lines, and machines that always seemed to quit 5 minutes before the end of a shift. The place was loud enough that you learned to read lips. By the time I got home every evening, my clothes smelled like grease and hot steel. I complained about that job all the time, especially during my last few years. I'd walk through the front door and say, 3 more years. A few months later, it became 18 months. Eventually, just get me to retirement. Linda would smile without looking up from whatever she was doing. You've been saying that for 10 years. I mean it this time. I know. She always said the same thing. I know. We weren't wealthy, never had been, but we'd done all right. The mortgage was paid off, the pickup still ran. Our son Michael had a good job in North Carolina. He and his wife were raising 2 kids. Linda had retired from the public library the year before I did. Life was finally supposed to slow down. For the first time in decades, nobody needed overtime from me. I'd spent years imagining retirement, sleeping until 7, coffee on the porch, fishing on weekdays, watching baseball without checking the clock. No emergency calls, no Christmas shutdowns, no crawling under equipment at 2 in the morning. That picture got me through a lot of long days. I honestly figured the best part of my life was waiting just past my last shift. When retirement finally arrived, the guys in maintenance bought donuts. Somebody passed around an old hard hat for everyone to sign. My supervisor handed me a plaque. Another guy gave me a new tackle box. I cleaned out my locker, a couple of family pictures, an old thermos, the dented coffee mug I'd been using for almost 20 years. When I closed that locker door, it echoed louder than I expected, maybe because I knew I'd never open it again. At 3 o'clock, I walked over to the time clock, slid my card into the machine. Click. I'd heard that sound almost every workday since I was in my 20s. This time, it sounded different. Not better, just final. The passenger seat was packed with retirement gifts on the drive home. Cookies, fishing lures, the framed crew photo. That old coffee mug rolled back and forth every time I turned a corner. Linda was already standing on the porch when I pulled into the driveway. Well? I smiled. I made it. She hugged me. How does it feel? I looked back toward the truck. I don't know yet. She laughed. Ask yourself next week. I laughed too. I honestly thought she was right. The first week was exactly what I'd imagined. I slept later than usual, read the newspaper front to back, drank coffee without looking at the clock, organized my fishing gear, straightened the garage, watched an afternoon baseball game start to finish. Neighbors stopped by. Old co-workers called. Everybody asked the same question. So, how's retirement? It's great. Back then, I meant it. The second week got quieter. The phone rang less often. The garage didn't need organizing anymore. I'd already finished the book I'd started. Fishing by yourself turned out to be different than I'd imagined. I'd catch a couple of fish, sit there listening to the water, then head home early, because there wasn't much reason to stay. One afternoon, I looked at the kitchen clock. It was only 1:15. I would have sworn the day was almost over. I never knew time could crawl like that when nobody's expecting you anywhere. By the third week, the days had started running together. One morning, I looked over at Linda. What day is it? She didn't even look up from her crossword puzzle. Tuesday. I thought it was Thursday. She smiled. Welcome to retirement. I smiled back, but something about that answer bothered me. For nearly 50 years, every day had belonged somewhere. Monday meant one thing, Friday meant another. Now they all looked the same. My body never really retired. Every morning my eyes opened at exactly 4:45. No alarm, just habit. I'd stare at the ceiling a few seconds before it came back to me. There wasn't a machine waiting on me. Nobody expected me at the mill. Nobody was wondering where Frank was. Sometimes I'd get up anyway, make coffee, stand at the kitchen window while the neighborhood was still dark. One by one, porch lights came on. Pickup trucks backed out of driveways. People headed to work. I watched them disappear down the street. Then I'd sit back down at the kitchen table with a full cup of coffee and nowhere to be. One morning I walked into the mudroom and pulled on my old work boots. Left boot, right boot. Tie one lace, tie the other. I reached for my truck keys, stopped, looked at the front door, then back at the boots. There was nowhere I needed to go. I sat down, untied both boots, lined them up neat against the wall, walked back into the kitchen in nothing but my socks. I never mentioned that morning to Linda. Didn't have to. When she walked into the kitchen a few minutes later, she looked at my boots by the door, then looked at me. She didn't ask a single question, just poured herself a cup of coffee and sat beside me in silence. Linda noticed the change before I'd admit it to myself. One morning she walked into the living room and found me sitting in the same recliner I'd been in since breakfast. The television was on. I couldn't have told you what I was watching. "You've been sitting there a while." "I'm relaxing." She looked at me for a second. "No, I'm retired." "I know." She folded her arms. "You're waiting." I frowned. "For what?" She gave a small shrug. "I don't think you know." Then she walked back into the kitchen. I stayed where I was. The television kept talking. I couldn't tell you a single word of it. A few days later, I needed a part for the lawnmower. The hardware store was only a couple miles from the mill. Without thinking, I turned onto the old road. The steel mill looked exactly the way I'd left it. The smokestacks, the chain link fence, the faded company sign. The parking lot was full. Morning shift. Pickup trucks rolled in. Others pulled out. Men hurried toward the gate carrying thermoses and lunchboxes. Some laughed. One guy jogged across the lot buttoning his work shirt. For 42 years, that had been my morning. I slowed almost to a stop. For a second, I thought about pulling in. Maybe grabbing coffee with the guys. Maybe walking through the maintenance shop one more time. Instead, I drove past. Told myself I was just taking the scenic route home. Even I didn't believe that. The strange thing was, I didn't miss the work itself. Didn't miss crawling under greasy equipment. Didn't miss emergency breakdowns. Didn't miss 12-hour shifts. What I missed was hearing somebody say, "Frank, can you give me a hand?" Or, "We've been looking for you." For 42 years, somebody needed me almost every hour of every day. Now, some afternoons my own phone never rang. When I got home, I wandered into the garage. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. Every wrench hung on its hook. The shelves were neat. The lawnmower had fresh oil. I walked slowly around the room, looking for something, anything. A loose hinge, a broken shelf, a dull blade. Nothing. The garage had never looked better. I'd never liked it less. For the first time in my adult life, there wasn't a single problem waiting for me to solve. About a week later, my phone finally rang. "Eddie." "Hey, old man," I laughed. "You boys still breaking things without me? Barely keeping the place running." We talked for 15 minutes. A conveyor motor, a new supervisor, who'd retired, who'd gotten divorced. The usual shop talk. Nothing important. When we hung up, I realized I was smiling. Then I looked around the living room. The smile disappeared. It wasn't Eddie I missed. It was feeling like I still belonged there. Sunday afternoon, Michael called, like he always did. "How's retirement?" "It's good." "You been fishing?" "A little." "Keeping busy?" "Sure." There was a pause. Then he said, "Dad." "Yeah?" "You sound lonely." I laughed too quick. "I'm fine." You sure? I've got plenty to do. He didn't push. Okay. We talked about the grandkids. His oldest had started Little League. The youngest had lost another tooth. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen holding my phone. He'd heard something in my voice, something I hadn't wanted to hear myself. The next morning, I went looking for an extension cord in the spare bedroom. Most of Linda's things were still exactly where she'd left them. She'd been gone 2 years. Some mornings, I still caught myself expecting to hear the front door open and her call out, "I'm home!" The room smelled faintly of cedar from the old closet. Boxes lined one wall, photo albums, a sewing basket, stacks of library books she'd never donated. Then I found one of her notebooks. Wasn't a diary. Linda wasn't the diary type. She used notebooks for grocery lists, recipes, garden ideas, little things she wanted to remember. I sat down by the window and started turning pages. Most of it was ordinary. Then one page stopped me. There was only one sentence, no date, no explanation, just one line. I hope when Frank retires, he remembers how to live without working. I read it again, then again. I leaned back in the chair and looked out the window. Cars rolled past the house. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Life kept moving. I thought about all those evenings I'd come home from the mill, eat dinner, fall asleep in my recliner before the 10 o'clock news, wake up and do it all again. Maybe Linda had seen something I never did. Maybe work hadn't just been my job. Maybe it had quietly become the only place I knew exactly who I was. I closed the notebook. For the first time since retiring, I admitted something to myself. I wasn't missing the steel mill. I was missing the man I used to be there. The next morning, I woke up at 4:45 again. For a few seconds, I lay there staring at the ceiling. Then I got up, made coffee, set Linda's notebook on the kitchen table. I read that one sentence again. I hope when Frank retires, he remembers how to live without working. I closed the notebook. Maybe that was my job now. Not learning how to stop working, learning how to matter somewhere else. After breakfast, I climbed into my pickup. When I reached the intersection, turning left would have taken me to the steel mill. I almost did it. Instead, I kept driving. About 10 minutes later, I pulled into the parking lot of a community workshop run by a local church. I'd driven past that sign 100 times. Furniture repair, volunteer workshop. Never had a reason to stop. Until now. The place smelled like sawdust and fresh coffee. Old workbenches filled the room. Half-finished tables, broken rocking chairs, cabinet doors waiting for hinges. About a dozen men worked quietly. Gray hair, reading glasses, coffee mugs sitting next to tape measures. Nobody seemed to be rushing. Reminded me of the maintenance shop before the morning bell, only quieter. A man wearing safety glasses looked up. "Need something?" I was just looking. He smiled. Most people who come in just looking don't leave right away. I laughed. "We'll see." He walked over and held out his hand. "I'm Pete." "Frank. What did you do before you retired?" "Maintenance." "What kind?" "Steel mill." "How long?" 42 years. His eyebrows went up. Then he pointed toward an old jointer sitting against the wall. "You know how to set one of those up?" I couldn't help smiling. "I've probably forgotten more than I remember." Pete laughed. "I'll take forgotten experience over no experience." Then he nodded toward an empty workbench. "Come on, let's see what you've still got." That was the first time since retirement somebody expected something from me. Nobody asked for a resume. Nobody cared about my title. Nobody asked how much money I'd made. One of the volunteers was trying to repair an old dining chair. The replacement pieces were already cut. They just didn't fit quite right. He looked over at me. "What do you think?" I picked up one of the rails, turned it over. "Take a little off this shoulder." "How much?" "About the thickness of a nickel." He looked doubtful. "You sure?" "Try it." A few minutes later, everything slid together perfectly. He smiled. "I would have fought that thing all afternoon." I shrugged. "I've made enough mistakes to know what usually causes them." He laughed. "I like that answer." So did I. I went back the next Wednesday, then the one after that. Pretty soon, Wednesday just became part of my week. Pete had worked for the railroad. George had been an electrician. Sam drove school buses for 30 years. None of us spent much time talking about retirement. We talked about walnut versus oak, drawer slides, loose chair legs, whose turn it was to bring donuts. The conversations weren't important, but they were real. When I drove home, I didn't wonder anymore what I was going to do tomorrow. I already knew. About a month later, Michael called again. "How you doing?" "Pretty good." "You sound different." "Do I?" "Yeah, better." I looked toward the garage. "Think I finally found something." "What is it?" "I don't know if it's the workshop, or just having somewhere people expect me to be." He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "I've missed hearing you sound like this." I smiled. I think I missed it too. Life didn't suddenly get exciting. It got steady. Wednesday mornings belonged to the workshop. Thursday breakfast belonged to Eddie and another retired mechanic from the mill. Whenever Michael brought the grandkids to visit, my grandson headed straight for the garage. Sometimes we'd fix his bicycle. Sometimes we'd build a birdhouse. Sometimes we'd spend 20 minutes hunting for a screwdriver that had been sitting on the workbench the whole time. Those afternoons became my favorite part of the week. Not because we built anything special, because nobody was in a hurry to leave. Almost a year after retiring, I drove past the steel mill again. The parking lot was full. Morning shift, coffee mugs, lunch boxes, men hurrying toward another workday. I slowed down for a moment, not because I wanted to go back, because I wanted to thank that place for the life it gave me. Then the light turned green. I kept driving. This time, I didn't look back in the mirror. When I walked into the workshop, Pete looked up from his bench. "Morning, Frank." "Morning." George pointed toward an old dresser. "We saved this one for you." I set my dented coffee mug on the corner of the workbench, hung up my jacket, rolled up my sleeves, picked up a tape measure. For a long time, I thought a paycheck was what made work matter. Turns out, it was knowing someone was glad to see me when I walked through the door.